Hello everybody, and while you are on a break from your TV show, I'm going to teach you about math. Math is great, however, more specifically, I'm going to teach you about quadratics. Quadratics are written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. A is the factor that's squared, and this makes a quadratic a quadratic. B is the value that you bust out when you're factoring, and C is the constant of your quadratic.
Now that we've established what a quadratic is, we're going to teach you how to solve it. When you solve a quadratic, you're looking for the zeros. These are also known as the x-intercepts, or where the parabola crosses the x-axis. When this happens, your y value will be 0. There are many ways that you can solve a quadratic and get zeros. However, today we are only going to teach you about one, and that's factoring.
Factoring is one of the 5 ways you can solve a quadratic. It can be simple if you follow a few easy steps. Are you ready to go through an example? We will do one example with you showing you the steps, and then we will try to find more examples showing the problem and doing it with you. However, we encourage you to pause your TV and try a problem. When you get your answer, unpause the button and then make sure that you did all the work right. So let's go.
Step 1 is to move all your terms to one side and equal the quadratic to 0. Our example is x squared minus 10 equals 9x. You have to subtract 9x from both sides. Now you have x squared minus 9x minus 10 equals 0. You're done with step 1. Once you're done with your first step, you have to make sure there is not a greatest common factor in your equation. Or GCF. A GCF stands for your greatest common factor, and it was the highest number that all terms could be divided into. The problem that we went over in the last step does not have a GCF, so we're going to try one that does. The GCF of this problem is 2. So once you pull out a GCF of 2, you pull out the GCF, you divide everything by it, and then you have x squared plus 4x plus 8 equals 0. You're done with this step of pulling out a GCF. This is not always a necessary step, but you always have to check and make sure if it is.
The first step when you are learning to factor an equation is to multiply the first and third terms by each other. So you would multiply 1 times negative 10, and that's equal to negative 10 again. So you take out the m in the MA chart and replace it with a negative 10.
The third step that you're going to take with factoring is finding the magic number. In this problem, you want to find two numbers that multiply to equal negative 10 and add up to equal negative 9. So you have to guess and check, so let's try negative 2 times 5, and that multiplies to give us negative 10. Like we need, however, add to give us 3, which is what we don't need. So how about we try this? Negative 10 times 1 gives us negative 10, but adds to give us negative 9. That's what we needed.
Now that we have the two magic numbers that Cameron helped us find in the last step, we have to bust out our B. So what you do is rewrite your problem, however the B value is the two numbers you found, which is negative 10 and 1. So for this problem, you'd like to write it as x squared minus 10x plus 1x minus 10 is equal to 0. Now you're done using bust out the B and this step.
Now that you have a 4-term problem, it's time to group. You group your first two terms together, which in this case is x squared minus 10x, and your second two terms together, which in this case is 1x minus 10x. Now you're done grouping, and move on to Cameron to see what we do with these groups.
Now that we have our quadratic into two groups, from the last step, it is time to find the GCF of each group. The GCF stands for the greatest common factor. It means the highest number that can go into both terms. For the first group, the GCF is x, since that is the only thing that both terms can go into. For the second group, the GCF is 1, since there is no GCF. However, you can pull out a GCF of 1.
After you pull out the GCF, you have to make sure the terms inside of the parentheses are the same. Then after that, you take out the x and the 1, and then you plug them into the same parentheses, and then x and the 10 into the same parentheses.
As Anaya saw in the last set, she found our two pairs, and now we set them equal to 0 so we can solve. So once we solve, we had to add plus 10, and we get x equals 10. So the parabola will cross the x-axis at the 10. And then you do the same for the x plus 1, but you minus 1. You get x equals negative 1. So you know that the parabola will cross the x-axis again at the negative 1.
Now we have one step left, and that is step 4. For step 4, you just have to write your answer as a solution set. How you write your final answer as a solution set is x equals and this right here. For our examples, since the two answers are 1 and 10, you write your answer as a solution set like this. Right here.
Okay. Gone through the steps with you, we are hoping that you feel comfortable enough to solve quadratic equations by factoring all by yourself. We are going to do 5 practice problems. We encourage you to pause the video and your TV, then when you have an answer, press play, and we are going to solve the problem and show you the correct answer. So let's get started.
Once you find your value for your MA chart, you have to find the two magic numbers that you will. For this one, it'll be 3 and 4, since they multiply to give you negative 12 and they add to give you 7. Then you break up your quadratic and group it and find your GCFs. Then you have to group and make sure that the two numbers inside the parentheses are the same. Now that you have that, you keep one of your parentheses and group your two GCFs together, and then you set those equal to 0. And once you solve, you solve for your x, and then you write this as a solution set. First, you have to make sure that your quadratic equals 0, and that you know you have to subtract x, 7x equals 0. So then you have x squared minus 10x equals 0. Then you find the values that you put in your MA chart, and then you have to find your two magic numbers that you will need. The two magic numbers that you will need in this problem is negative 8 and 2, since they multiply to give you negative 16 and negative 2. They multiply to give you negative 16, and they add to give you negative 10. Once you break up when you bust out your B, you have to pull out the GCFs of each of your groups. Once you put this together, you have to make sure the numbers in the parentheses are the same, and then you keep one of the numbers in the parentheses, and you group your GCFs together. Once you do this, you have to solve for 0, and once you get it, you solve your solution set. For this one, you have to make sure that there's no GCF, however, there's not, and so once you do this, you have to find the values to put in your MA chart. Once you do this, you have to find the two magic numbers that you will need to solve it, and for this one, it would be negative 9 times 2, since it multiplies to give you negative 18 and adds to give you negative 7. Once you do this, you have to bust out your B, and once you do this, you will pull out your two GCFs and make sure the numbers inside your parentheses are the same. Once you get this, you keep one of your numbers in the parentheses, and then you take your two GCFs and group them together, and then you solve for 0, and once you have your two answers, you write this as a solution set. Okay, so for this problem, you have a GCF, so you pull out your GCF of 3, and after that, it's x squared minus 5x plus 4 equals 0. Once you have this, you make your MA chart, and for this, you would do, you find the numbers that you put in your MA chart. The two magic numbers that you will need for this problem are negative 1 and negative 4, since they multiply to give you 4, but add to give you negative 5. Once you do this, you have to bust out your B, and once you bust out your B, you have to group your terms and find your GCFs. Once you find your GCFs, you have to make sure that the numbers inside the parentheses are the same. And if they are, then you have to keep whatever your parentheses and then group your other GCFs. Then you solve for 0, and then once you get this, your answer is a solution set. For this problem, you have to make sure that all your terms on one side are equal 0, so you add 15 to both sides, and then you have x squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0. Then you have to find the two numbers that you will put in your MA chart, and then you have to find the two magic numbers you'll need to bust out your B. For this problem, it will be negative 3 and negative 5, since they multiply to give you 15 and add to give you negative 8 like you need. Once you bust out your B, you group your terms together, and you find the GCF of each term. Once you find the GCF of each term, you have to make sure the numbers inside the parentheses are the same. And if they are, then you group your two terms together and you solve for 0. And you solve. And once you have your two numbers, then you write your answer as a solution set. Done.
And last but not least, factoring, which we learned today in our info.
Thanks for watching, and now back to your show.